Shabbat Shalom. This week, I heard a question that practically stopped me in my tracks. I was participating in a staff training with a leadership coach named Alonso Kelly, and he asked us, "Why did you graduate high school?" The question really didn't register. Why did I graduate high school? In my mind, it wasn't even a question. In my house, it's just something that you do. Growing up in urban Detroit, graduating high school was not a given for Kelly and those in his neighborhood. He asked this question in order to challenge our assumptions about what we think of as universal truths or understandings. Later that same day, I took a hard hat tour of a new preschool being built, and it's co-located in an affordable housing apartment building, which is also under construction. The general contractor giving the tour said something that once again almost made me stop in my tracks. She said that it was a trauma-informed design. That is to say, the families who will be sending their children to this preschool likely have experienced some kind of trauma, for example, being refugees, and that the design was taking that into account in the colors that they were choosing, in the size of the room, the height of the ceiling, the noise dampening materials, and on and on. This was just one of the many thoughtful components being used to create the optimal learning experience, and again, something that in my own experience I had never really considered that challenged some of my assumptions about school. With students heading back to school, and as we head into a new year, I want to ask us to pause and to reflect on the value we place on education, on how we learn, on why we learn. And our Parsha is a good place to start. Just as the Israelites conclude their 40 years of wandering and prepare to enter the Promised Land, they're given one final instruction. Erect 12 stone pillars at the border crossing, the Jordan River. Coat those stones with plaster and clearly inscribe on them the words of this teaching. Now, there are many elements about this passage that are worth considering. Why were stones to be placed at the border? Why were they to be covered with plaster? What exactly was inscribed on them, and on and on? But the first question is the most basic. Why erect pillars of Torah in the first place? If anything, you might have thought that the Israelites would erect a statue of Moses or a monument celebrating the fact that they had concluded their desert wandering and arrived in the Promised Land. Instead, they were to write down the Torah on these pillars. Why? Well, listen to the verse that gives the explanation. The Torah says, when you cross the Jordan, inscribe on the stones the word of this Torah, Laman Asher Tavo. I'm not going to translate that quite yet. Laman Asher Tavo, to the land that God is giving you, a land flowing with milk and honey. This phrase, Laman Asher Tavo, is the key. Two medieval Spanish commentators offer two possible understandings. Ibn Ezra explains Laman Asher Tavo to mean, place these stones at the border, the stones of Torah, so that you might enter and successfully dwell in the land. In other words, by studying and keeping the Torah, the Israelites will know how best to live in Canaan. The goal is to settle the Promised Land, and the Torah provides them the instructions to do so successfully. Ramban, Nachmanides, on the other hand, he says that the Israelites are entering the land Lama'an in order to live a life of study, a life of Torah. The goal is not specifically dwelling in the land per se, but rather upholding the Torah. And it is in the land where Torah can most fully be lived. For Ibn Ezra, Torah is the preparation and the precondition for entering the land. For Ramban, it is the reward for entering the land. I have a feeling that when it comes to education, many of us can identify first and foremost with the approach of Ibn Ezra. We go to school in order to enter a promised land, to earn a particular degree, to get a specific kind of job, to earn a desirable salary, to live a certain kind of life. Learning is a means to an end. And of course, this is a very effective approach. We see that the reward is worth our effort. I imagine that this is a lesson that was instilled by many of us, by immigrant parents, maybe a few generations back. They didn't necessarily go to high school, they didn't necessarily finish college, but they ensured and expected that we would. In traditional Jewish thought, however, there is an additional, or you might say even more exalted approach to education. We learn lishma, for its own sake. Learning is in and of itself the reward, because learning is sacred. The difference is going to school to pass a test or to get a job versus going to school to learn, because learning enriches us, expands us, connects us, because learning is holy. In my experience, learning is a pillar, it's a core value of our Jewish community. Even more, let's say, than belief in God, Sur Yisrael, the rock of Torah, the rock of Israel is Torah. It's a foundation in our lives. We say blessings over learning, we sing about it, we dedicate ourselves to it night and day. That's for sure true for us when it comes to secular studies. I'm not sure, though, that we have the same commitment to our Jewish studies, which is something that we should work on. When it comes to Alonzo's Detroit neighborhood, or a community that requires trauma-informed design, it's not for any of us to pass judgment who have not lived in or experienced those communities. I know that I can't begin to appreciate what education means there. For us, I'm proud that learning is a given, that school is assumed, but we should never take that for granted. Yes, it's a right, but it's also a tremendous privilege. It's a means to an end, yes, but it is a reward in and of itself. And we should approach it, therefore, with gratitude and with intention. As we cross over to a new year, may we pause to reflect on the place of learning in our lives. What are our goals, our learning goals for this new year? How might we strive to learn lishma, just for its own sake? And what can all of us do to ensure that others in and outside of our community have what they need to learn most successfully? With gratitude to our schools, our teachers and administrators, our counselors and specialists, may we put the time in and the effort in to grow in wisdom and understanding, and thus may learning always be sweet in our mouths. Amen. Turn back in our Siddurim to page 155 for the Chatzi Kaddish introducing Musaf.